everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Lee, and I look after network research and strategy for Barrett Value Center. I'm happy to welcome you to this webinar and introduce our special guests. John Mackey is the co-CEO of Whole Foods Market and the co-founder of Conscious Capitalism. Richard Barrett is the founder and chairman of Barrett Value Center and the creator of the Cultural Transformation Tools. Today, we have the pleasure of listening to John and Richard explore the topic of values-driven leadership in business and society as a warm-up to our upcoming 2016 CTT International Conference. So I invite you to clear away any distractions, sit back, and enjoy. And I'll hand it over to you now, Richard. How are you?
Well, thank you, Hannah. Great, thank you. And I'm really happy to have John with us today so that we can begin to explore and tease out some of the topics that we will be covering at our next annual conference, September 2016 in Canada. So John, a big welcome to you today, and thank you for showing up.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks for inviting me.
So, John, what we're going to be talking about today will be the whole topic of conscious capitalism and its link to values and consciousness. So, let's start off with, what's your view on the role that values play in conscious capitalism? And we know that everybody actually operates through values, whether they know it or not, and some may be positive and some may be potentially limiting. But I'm talking about conscious values. What role do conscious values play in conscious capitalism?
I like the way you frame that up, Richard, because indeed, I mean, everyone operates from values. It's just a question of which values they operate from. So business has been somewhat, I think, inaccurately caricatured as always operating from the value of maximizing profits and shareholder value. And I think that's sometimes true, but I think it's actually unfair to most businesses, which generally operate from a sense of purpose or some values besides just making money. But certainly the conscious business does. So conscious capitalism is a philosophy where a business determines what its higher purpose is besides just making money. Why does it exist in the world? What is its true value that it's trying to create in the world? And then it's also conscious about creating value for all the major stakeholders, not just the investors, but the customers, the employees, the suppliers, the communities that we're part of, while minimizing environmental damages. So values play an extremely important part. It's the essence of what conscious capitalism is. It's about being conscious of your higher values and actualizing that through the business.
So what we have noticed in mapping the values of organizations and measuring their success is that ultimately it comes down to leadership and I would say the stages of, or the stage of psychological development that the leaders are at, hopefully a higher stages, and the values that they embrace. So what does, if you embrace conscious capitalism, I'm assuming you embrace conscious leadership. So how does conscious leadership show up at Whole Foods, and what do you do to promote conscious leadership?
Well, that's a very good point. It's impossible to have a conscious business if you don't have conscious leadership, particularly at the most senior levels, because, well, they will sabotage it and to make sure that it doesn't really get much traction. And I mean, there's a number of things you do to promote conscious leadership in an organization. The first point, of course, is that, like Gandhi said, you have to be the change that you wish to see in the world. So if you are a leader, you have to embody the qualities of a conscious leader, which we identify as higher degree of emotional intelligence, having a higher degree of spiritual intelligence, and having a higher degree of systems intelligence. These are all things that are not taught in school, but require us to go through emotional and spiritual evolution or growth. And in some ways those, and I think that moves through certain predictable stages, and that each of those, if you read Daniel Goleman's work or you read, read your own work, you see that people are capable of growth, they're capable of learning, they're capable of evolving. And it's interesting in a way because when the human potentials movement was really getting started and entering into popular consciousness for the first time back, say, in the 60s and 70s, it was often attacked and ridiculed as people just gazing at their navels or having encounter groups, sort of attacked as narcissistic. But what's turned out to be the case as we look 40 or 50 years later is that it's hardly narcissistic. Leaders now have an ethical responsibility to grow and evolve as people and as leaders, because as they do that, they grow not just for themselves, but they grow for their organizations. I know, in fact, at Whole Foods that there have been a few times where I feel like the company was stuck, and it required me to get unstuck personally, because as I learned, as I grew, as I evolved, it freed up the company's energy to move forward, upward as well. So we also have some of the things you asked the question, what do we do? So we embody it as we lead by example. We also make sure that the core values of our company are they're in each of our stores has them painted on the walls. We take orientations of our team members through those values. And we also have something we call the Conscious Leadership Academy, where we've taken a couple thousand of our leaders through that process. And for many of them, it's the very first time they've ever done any inner work. They've ever actually done the most simple type of inner work, which is just questionnaires and reflecting on their own life choices, their own aspirations, their own motivations. It's an awakening for many people to begin to do even the most basic type of inner work. But you have to do the inner work if you're going to learn, grow, and evolve. So that Leadership Academy has been very successful for us, and something that we use to help develop our conscious leaders.
I imagine the leaders you put through that academy notice the benefits of what they learn, not just in their working life, but in their personal life and home life too. Have you found that to be true?
I mean, I think that's a logical thing to conclude, but we haven't done any kind of study about whether people's lives are better at home. I mean, anecdotally, people would say that they're happier, but we haven't, again, studied it.
Okay. As it so happened, you mentioned spiritual intelligence, and I know that you wrote the foreword to Cindy Wigglesworth's book on spiritual intelligence, and it just so happens that Cindy's in London tomorrow, and I'm going to be attending her workshop, so that's kind of interesting. But so
I love Cindy's book, and in fact, Cindy has if you talk to her about this tomorrow when you see her, Cindy's done she's done quite a bit of work for our Conscious Leadership Academy.
I was wondering if she had.
Yeah, her book is a wonderful guide for people that want to systematically work. She basically framed it up, developed methods and techniques, and she has her own testing program that she can do to sort of measure your spiritual intelligence. So say hi to Cindy for me.
I will do that, yeah. So apart from your your academy, which you say you put 2,000 people through, I imagine you've got several thousand more leaders or managers or supervisors. What kind of training do they get, or more than, shall we say, just looking at and exploring and finding meaning in the values of the company?
I mean, that's more decentralized based on our regions, and I mean we have 90,000 people working for the company, and so we have a lot of leaders. It's expensive to take people through a Conscious Leadership Academy, and we were talking about the time you fly people down, pay them for their time, put them in hotels, feed them, pay people to teach them. You're looking at quite a haul, so it's millions of dollars the company has invested in Conscious Leadership Academy. And the idea being that if you take your most important leaders and help them, then they spread the ideas throughout the culture, throughout the organization. And so I think other than the fact that Whole Foods is very decentralized, very empowered, and I'm not sure that we're doing very much more than that other than leading through example. And again, we have Whole Foods has been named one of the 100 best companies to work for in the U.S. for the last 18 consecutive years. So people do enjoy working for our company. They do find fulfillment there, and I think that emanates from our spiritual intelligence, collective spiritual intelligence.
Yeah, that what you mentioned there is something that I noticed. You know, the cost of sending leaders through this type of training is enormous. And when I wrote the New Leadership Paradigm, I gave a lot of thought to that idea, to the idea that actually, you know, the whole process of conscious leadership begins with leading self. Then once you can lead self, you can lead a team. But if you can't lead self, you have difficulty leading a team. And once you can lead a team, you know, maybe you can lead an organization or a department. But the idea that I wanted to put out there in that book is that, in fact, it is quite possible to, through modern media, to set up leading self workshops at a very low cost and offer them to, I would think, that 50 to 80% of staff. And that's an idea that I've been trying to promote, because I think it's a way to bring these ideas and this learning to a much larger group of people in an organization. I'd be interested to hear your reflections on that.
You're saying that's via online learning? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but online learning substituted with, you know, locally within the organization, with meetings every, shall we say, a month for a couple or 2 or 3 days, where you go over the learnings that you've done online, and have a chance to talk about your reactions and to discuss with other people.
Well, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, well, I believe it's a good idea. It's getting some traction in different places, but I do think that you know, the millions of dollars that we spend on, you know, training our leaders could be for a smaller fraction of that money, we could actually train or help a lot more people. But anyhow, that's a different topic. Back to conscious leadership and conscious capitalism. What do you think, John, is going to take to convince more leaders that conscious capitalism is worthwhile, that it's a worthwhile investment in our current business climate?
Honestly, I don't think. I mean, I think I think conscious capitalism is rapidly spreading, and if you Google that, you'll get a lot of hits for it. It's entered into sort of the, at least in the United States, has entered into the business lexicon, or into the conversation. And honestly, business is so dynamic and so competitive that whatever succeeds tends to spread fairly rapidly. And conscious capitalism does make your business more successful. It's not the only thing that can make a business successful, but it does tend to help businesses be successful. And it's harder for older legacy organizations who have ingrained cultures and ways of doing things. It's very difficult for them to shift. So it's young entrepreneurs that take up these ideas and start new organizations and new companies. And they're very successful when they do so. So I actually think conscious capitalism, it'll take a generation, but you'll see the old legacy businesses eventually either evolve or die, and you'll see lots of startups grow and the ideas will spread that way. So I'm actually not too worried about it because I know the ideas work. I've written a book. I've started a nonprofit organization. I do a dozen or so speeches a year on it around the country and occasionally in other countries, and it seems to me that the ideas are rapidly disseminating.
So let me put the question, just to tease this out a little bit more, let me put the question the other way around. You know, what do you see as the blocks to the spread of the conscious capitalism movement?
I think the biggest block is sort of a framework, the narratives that organizations, particularly business, might tell about themselves, particularly the metaphors that people use, such as, I mean, war metaphors are very dominant in business thinking. It's kill or be killed. It's
dog eat dog, but I've never seen a dog eat a dog, but never mind.
Yeah, we're gonna roll over those guys. You've got staff, you've got line, you've got a lot of military metaphors in business. You also have a lot of sports metaphors, which imply somebody's winning and somebody else is losing. We gotta, you know, we're gonna beat those guys. And then you've got Darwinian metaphors, the survival of the fittest. It's a jungle out there. Only the paranoid survive. And these metaphors are so powerful that they hypnotize people. That they're the invisible ropes that keep business from becoming more conscious. And as I would like to say, love, which is an extremely important spiritual value, in my book, the most important spiritual value is it's pretty much in the closet in most corporations, because love is seen as weakness. Love is, yeah, that sounds very idealistic, but in the real world, it's a jungle out there. We're fighting for our lives. If we don't, you know, it's a continuous struggle to just survive. So you've got those type of metaphors, and they keep these higher spiritual values sort of locked up because they're seen as soft, they're seen as weak. And so you have a lot of traditional masculine macho values that traditionally dominate corporations. And the rise of feminine values, caring, nurturing, communication, trust, these values, love, these values have been not fully empowered. And I think that's beginning to change. I think things like conscious capitalism and the rise of women into more leadership positions means the metaphors that hold more spiritual values back are beginning to be transformed. And as they transform, we'll see the path towards more conscious leadership get more well trod. It will, consciousness will expand at accelerating rates.
So do you think that the belief systems, the culture behind the stock market is also a handicap to the movement of conscious capitalism?
I do. I think mostly because that part of the business culture, I would argue, is the most sort of locked into sort of self-limiting beliefs, and the profit is the only thing that really matters. Shareholder value is the only thing that really matters. They don't have a because they're dealing mostly with numbers and abstractions as opposed to real people who have dreams and who are actually in the sort of the real world. I always say that the financial sector of capitalism will be the last domino to fall.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the place to start, although I do see some I know some conscious venture capitalists. I know some conscious private equity guys. We see them in our conferences, and so I even think that's beginning to shift. But they will shift ultimately because the businesses that they invest in, the businesses that they finance, will increasingly become more conscious. And in that sense, money is agnostic. It goes to wherever businesses are going to be most successful. So as they begin to discover increasingly that more conscious businesses are actually more successful in the marketplace, the financial sector will begin to shift money in that direction. And eventually they'll start connecting the dots and start asking themselves questions about their own businesses. So I think it's important to realize that the money will follow success, and success follows from being more conscious. So I do think eventually that will also be transformed.
Yes, I totally agree with that, and that was you know, the basic thesis for the book I wrote way back when I Liberating the Corporate Soul. I think I understood at that point the principles of conscious capitalism, but I couldn't put them into that phraseology. I couldn't find that short phrase that would say, well, this is what it's about.
I read that book and loved it, so maybe you seeded me to put the terms and create a language and a lingo about business that is more accessible to other business people. So you were would I have gotten there if I hadn't read your books? Maybe not. Who knows? There's a lot of influences, but you were certainly one of them.
Oh, thank you, John. I didn't know that. I think there are so many influences these days, and influence builds on influence. We cast our ideas out into the world like throwing pebbles into a pond, and the ripples go out, and we have no idea where they're going, where they reach, and they inspire people who then take their gifts and cast them into, like stones into a pond again, and those ripples go out, and it's a never-ending series of evolutionary thinking. At least that's the way that I see what's going on right now, and it seems to be happening quite rapidly. Have you got a final thought on that topic?
No, I think you just articulated it very well. I think that the world is very complex. It's very interdependent. Serendipity occurs all the time. Synchronicity occurs all the time. So ideas tend to oftentimes crop up in people's minds and hearts at very similar times, and it flows through us and goes out from us, and that's the way consciousness works. I think that's the way evolution works. And the great thing today is we live in such a connected world. The World Wide Web, which was only created in 1989, has fundamentally changed everything, and so everything's accelerating. Change is accelerating. Consciousness is accelerating. It's actually quite a wonderful time to be alive.
I agree with that, John. I totally agree. And let's say, let's hope that we're both going to be alive next year, next September, when it comes to our annual conference or biannual conference. We're going to look forward to hearing more from you at that time. And I guess, Hannah, we're about running out of time for today.
Yep, that's right. Thank you, John and Richard, for joining us today, and I've enjoyed listening to your conversation. It's been very interesting for me, and I hope it was interesting to everybody else. If you did enjoy this conversation, please consider joining us September 28th through the 30th, 2016 for our CTT International Conference in Toronto, Canada. Both John and Richard will be there, as well as a number of other inspirational speakers. The conference will bring leaders and practitioners together around the theme of building, I'm getting your books mixed up, Richard. The theme of values-driven leadership in business and society. We're going to put a link in the chat box now so you can learn more about the conference and how to register. So we hope to see you in Toronto, and please also keep an eye out for more pre-conference webinars with other speakers in the future. So we will be sending information about that out in our newsletters and social media. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your days. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Richard.